Coming up on this episode of Concussion Game Plan.
Before experiencing a concussion of my own, I literally had no idea the magnitude of what impact they could have on a person. I really didn't perceive them as severe, any sort of thing that could have a lasting consequence on someone's life. So that perception has totally changed.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Chris Nowinski, co-founder and CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. Welcome to episode 7 of the Concussion Game Plan podcast. This episode is dedicated to an important part of the concussion recovery course for athletes, returning to play. We'll outline the steps you should take to get back to your sport safely and the support you should seek in the process. Dr. Barry Jordan is here to advise athletes, parents, and athletic trainers how to manage return to play. We're so lucky he's agreed to share his decades of experience with us on Concussion Game Plan and can't wait for you to hear his insight. We also have a national champion in the house. University of Southern California beach volleyball player Julia Scholes will outline how she navigated the highs and lows of concussion recovery and reinvented herself as an athlete along the way. Let's get started.
I passed the ball and then my head hit the floor, bounced back, and then re-hit the floor. I remember falling, blacking out a little, and then everyone in the gym was surrounding me and they were looking at me, and I was like, I promise I'm not crying, guys, because I felt this liquid on my face, and someone was like, it's not tears, it's blood.
Julia Scholes describes her first diagnosed concussion. It happened during practice in her freshman year at the University of North Carolina, where she played for the women's indoor volleyball team.
It felt like my ears were literally rupturing, and it felt like they were spinning me in a circle when they were wheeling me out. And then it felt like I had to throw up, but I wasn't throwing up. It was just dry heaves, and my head was pounding, and then the light just was blinding. And so all of those severe symptoms happened for 30 minutes. And yeah, it was probably the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my life. And then after that, it kind of subsided. But they still wanted to get me to the hospital or the doctor. So I went there, and I was a little more calm then, but still freaked out about obviously what had just happened. And I just kind of listened to them with concussion protocol because I'd never experienced one. I didn't really know how to go about it. And so they were like, just rest, don't do anything that aggravates your symptoms, try to stay off technology, and then we'll reevaluate your symptoms in the coming days.
After a concussion, and typically they may be given what we call a head sheet. And if they're told something like take 2 weeks off, I think that's the incorrect advice. They should be advised that they should not participate until their symptoms have subsided at rest and with exertion, and also that they are not taking in medications that can mask the symptoms of concussion. So for example, if you have an athlete that's taking Tylenol for headaches and they say, I don't have any headaches because I'm taking the Tylenol, they should not be returning back to play.
Dr. Barry Jordan is the Chief Medical Officer at Rancho Los Amigos National Rehabilitation Center. After an athlete has been diagnosed with a concussion, Dr. Jordan says to be wary of any return to play guidance that provides a definite timeline.
They had me do a return to play protocol of taking the test, initiating some physical activity. And then once I was able to clear those things, they cleared me about 2 weeks after, I think.
In my day, return to play protocols like the one Julia describes didn't exist. If anyone I played or wrestled with was diagnosed with a concussion, we were told to rest in a dark room until we didn't have any more symptoms. Modern return to play protocols are based on decades of research that have taught us how to best protect athletes' short and long-term health after concussion.
There's basically 2 reasons why it could be detrimental or dangerous to return to competition after a concussion. The most serious issue is what's called the second impact syndrome, which occurs very rarely, but when it does occur, it's devastating. And basically what it represents is that the athlete who is still symptomatic from a concussion sustains a second concussion, but has an exaggerated response to that second concussion, which can be associated with significant neurological morbidity or mortality. The second reason why it may be detrimental to return to competition too soon after a concussion, or while you're still symptomatic from a concussion, is that it may take you much longer to recover. So normally, if a concussion would last, say, 7 days, if you have another concussion during that vulnerable period, it may take you 3, 4, 5 weeks to recover from a concussion. So that's why I think it's important that athletes do not return to play while they are still symptomatic. Another thing that I mentioned to my athletes is that if you're playing in a sport and you're concussed, the concussion can affect your reaction time, it can affect your reflexes, it can affect your thinking, which may end up causing you not to play as well. So you can also cost your team by not pulling yourself out if you're symptomatic from a concussion.
The first game I was back, I was in the game and I felt like immense pressure in my head and I felt like a little out of it, but I thought, oh no, I'm healed. This must be like I am just returning to play at a high level after not playing for 2 weeks. It must be like anxiety or something on the court. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get put back of going through the concussion protocol again. But then after that, I don't think I had an issue with that concussion again. So I was thinking, wow, like that was insanely painful, but I was only out for 2 weeks. And in my mind, I was like, I'm glad it wasn't a break or something because that would have put me out for the rest of the season, the semester. But yeah, now definitely would choose a break over any head injury. 2 weeks is minuscule in the scheme of things. And brain health is the most important thing in life, probably, because if you don't have your brain, you can't operate in a normal day-to-day setting in your sport and whatever you want to do. So I think taking those 2 weeks and really evaluating how you're feeling and being honest and truthful and not second guessing any of your symptoms is the smartest thing to do. It's not a negotiable. Like you sit out for those 2 weeks and you make sure you're good. And if you need more time, take the more time because it is not worth it.
Different teams and doctors may vary slightly in their approach, but most return to play protocols follow the same basic playbook.
Well, a return to play protocol basically involves a slow progression of your activity after a short rest period. In the past, we used to have athletes rest for a long period of time, and then after they were asymptomatic, we would have them increase their activity. Now, things have changed and progressed to the extent that we advocate a short rest period, and then you try to slowly increase your activity. First, you may start just with walking, and then you may progress to riding a bicycle. Then you can do some running, agility skills, and then actual practice without contact. The individual that should be involved in whether an athlete should return to play can be any healthcare professional who's knowledgeable about concussion. I wouldn't necessarily determine if an individual is able to tell an athlete to go back to play based just on their specialty. Um, for example, there's some neurologists that know about sports concussion, and there are other neurologists that do not know about sports concussion. So the type of healthcare individual should be one that's been trained and is knowledgeable about the area. Well, there's various tests you can perform to determine when an athlete can return to play. Obviously, symptoms are important, but that relies on the athlete being truthful regarding their symptoms. So there are tests that can be performed. Clinically, I prefer cognitive testing to determine if an athlete has returned to his or her baseline. The majority of concussions, and although all concussions are different, but the majority mostly involve some type of cognitive problem. So if you test them cognitively, I think that's a good indicator of recovery. And obviously, there's other tests that you can perform, including the neurological examination, looking at balance. Balance can be very sensitive to concussion. But I think cognitive testing is probably the most important.
This level of supervision from a medical professional during an athlete's return to play is the gold standard, but we know it's not the norm. There are plenty of inequities in concussion care.
The fact that an athlete does not have a athletic trainer available to assist in his return to play protocol, I think highlights an important issue that often is not looked at in terms of return to play after concussion. And I think it highlights what I often term as health disparities in the management of concussion. As in other areas of health, there are disparities between different socioeconomic, racial groups. So, for example, lower income schools or neighborhoods may not have the school being able to provide an athletic trainer. So there's going to be some disparities on what's available to you. And I think that's a very important issue.
Those disparities are a very important issue in concussion care. One way we try to combat them is by offering the free service of our CLF helpline. If you don't have access to an athletic trainer or haven't been able to find a concussion specialist in your area, we are here to help connect you with resources to guide you through your concussion recovery. Fill out a request anytime at concussionfoundation.org/helpline, and a member of our team will get in touch to provide personal assistance for you or your loved one. Unfortunately, Julia's journey with concussions was not over after her injury freshman year.
So my second concussion was the following summer. And that spring season, I felt like things started to click for me. I was getting a hang of the college level per se. I made one of my goals of making the USA college team. And so I kind of felt like the top of my game for where I was and the expectations I had for myself as a college player. So I was super excited for the season ahead. I was feeling great physically, feeling great mentally, kind of didn't really think about the previous concussion. It was in the back burner. And we were doing an open gym. I went up for a hit and I hit the ball, it bounced back and hit me in the face, and my neck kind of snapped backwards and I landed, and it was, I would say, a pretty hard hit, and I was not expecting it to come back and hit me in the face. And it actually like went over the net and got the point, but everyone stopped because they're like, whoa, what just happened? I wasn't experiencing obviously the same severe symptoms of the first ones. And my teammate was like, are you okay? Like, maybe you should tell the trainer. I'm like, yeah, I'll tell her after practice. So I finished the practice. I went and talked to the trainer and I said, hey, just wanted to like let you know I have like a slight headache, got hit in the head. I don't think anything's of it, but I did have a concussion. So just maybe like, do you have recommendations or whatnot? And she was like, yeah, just rest tonight, like take some Advil. I went home, I felt fine. And then the next day I was like groggy and kind of tired. And then Saturday I woke up like extremely nauseous, like extremely sensitive to light, like projectile vomiting. It was disgusting. And in my mind, I was like, not again, but it's only 2 weeks. So I was just like, okay, I'll chill for 2 weeks and then be good to go for preseason. But that was not the case.
The time to recover from a concussion can be highly variable. The shortest time would probably be 7 days. But again, that's also dependent upon the severity of the concussion. Again, if you go through a return to play protocol, sometimes that may in and of itself take 3 to 5 days just to get through that protocol.
So 2 weeks came and passed, and my trainer was saying, oh, like, let's monitor you for a third week. And that came and went. And I was just getting super frustrated because I'm like, you're telling me 1 more week and things aren't getting better. When are things going to get better?
Well, what happens to the brain after a concussion and results in a potential longer recovery is that the brain remains vulnerable. There's neurochemicals in the brain that may not have readjusted. There may be inflammation. damage to the neurons, damage to the supporting cells of the neurons. So, as in any injury, time is needed for recovery.
Return to play isn't an exact science, but we do know one core truth. An athlete still feeling symptoms is not ready to go back to play. It's a truth Julia wishes she would have known and followed.
And we were playing Wisconsin and Minnesota, who are like top 5 in the country. So I was like, I need to play in this game. Like, my team's counting on me. I kind of fibbed my way through concussion protocol, but I also kind of convinced myself that I was actually better when I wasn't, because I would say, oh, this is just a headache that everyone has, or I'm feeling this way because like I'm upset about something, but really it was like not something I'd normally feel emotionally. And then I played in that game and never played worse volleyball in my life. So that's kind of an indication as well. And I got re-hit in the head twice, but it was like off of a block and something like light. And I remember just not feeling great after the game. And then we flew back. And then on Monday was like when everything kind of just collapsed and I felt awful because that was the first day of school. And I realized that I literally like could not read. My eyes were like not tracking properly. I was so emotional and I kind of like accepted that I was going to take a longer time to recover. And so logically I was like, yes, like I'm going to do this, like it's all fine. But I was just irrationally emotional. Yeah, so I remember being in practice on Monday. This was like, I think before class, so I didn't really know that like I hadn't tried to read anything like aside from like a text message where if it's a line, like I could track it, but if it's like a paragraph, I like my eyes just, it just didn't really make sense to my eyes at the time. I remember being in practice and my coaches were kind of upset with the team because we hadn't won that weekend. And I was like, I always give my best effort. And I was just like in a funk and cloudy. And just like my coaches were like, it's fine if you don't feel good. You shouldn't be playing. But if you're going to play, you need to like play to the 100% of your ability. And then I just like broke down and don't think I had ever cried in a practice. And I just started like bawling. And my trainer brought me to like a dark room.
From there, Julia stopped training completely and started a recovery journey that would last nearly a year. She regrets pushing herself and hopes you'll learn from her experience to never be dishonest about how you're feeling after a concussion. Dr. Jordan says only after a concussed athlete is no longer feeling symptoms at rest are they ready to start a light exercise routine.
I advocate for starting at a low level of activity and progressing your activity slowly while avoiding bringing on or exacerbating any symptoms. You can start just by walking. And as you increase the tolerance with walking, then you might go to the bicycle. After bicycling, you might go to running. And if that doesn't bring on your symptoms, then you can do agility drills that's more related to the sport that you're playing. And then before you get back to full contact, you might do drills without contact just to make sure that your symptoms do not come back. Any exercise that brings on your symptoms should be avoided. But I also would avoid any exercise that are associated with a significant amount of what we call Valsalva maneuvers, such as heavy weightlifting, because those type of exercises may precipitate your headache. I also think that exercising in an extremely warm or hot climate is not recommended simply because of the potential compounding effects of heat exhaustion or heat illness, which can also mimic some of the symptoms of concussion. But increasing your heart rate, increasing your blood pressure, increasing your temperature can all make your symptoms worse. And again, the brain needs time to heal. So anything that may perturb the ability your brain to heal should be avoided. But in general, the types of exercises that should be avoided are any exercise that makes you feel worse.
I was like at ground zero and any like exercise would cause a headache or pressure in my head or make me lightheaded when I stood up. And during this, like my heart rate was fluctuating from when I would lay down, it would be in the 50s, and then sitting, it would be in the 80s, and then standing, it would be like 120, and then walking would be like 130, 140. And then I remember jogging in the training room, and a jog would like 172 heart rate. So I wasn't allowed to do like any form of like full cardio activity. I would bike, I guess, at a slow pace, but other than that, it was pretty much stagnant. And that's something that's so counterintuitive to me because in high school I did volleyball, basketball, track and field, like would always like go in for extra reps, would love training. Like my strength coach would be like, stop running stadiums on your off day. Like, so I was always trying to put in like 100% effort, and like I kind of knew my body and where I could push myself and my limits. So just being set back at like literally no physical activity was definitely hard mentally.
Trying not to work out is tough. I remember when I was a pro wrestler, I was completely paranoid about getting out of shape. And so I would go to the gym and I would work out until I started feeling too nauseous where I couldn't work out anymore. I think that was one of the worst things for my recovery because I was basically making myself sick every day out of this fear of getting out of shape, when in reality, my body needed a break and my brain needed time to recover. So please learn from us and let your brain take the rest it needs.
I tried to do things that weren't necessarily considered exercise, like long walks where I'd listen to a podcast, hence the podcast we're talking right now. But just listen to podcasts, listen to calm music, just moving my body and being active in ways that wouldn't cause my symptoms to flare up. And then once I would do that kind of thing, I would maybe hold a plank. And if I started feeling a lot of pressure in my head, I would stop. And any time on returning to exercise or training, I would listen to my body of after I didn't for a long period of time. I would now listen to my body and know that the symptoms were a warning sign that I needed to not push through them and take a step back. And then that allowed me, I think, to progress faster because I wasn't pushing the limits. And when I was feeling healthy, I would continue. And then once I started getting a headache, I would stop. And I think it's such a touch and go type thing, but really just being patient and understanding that it's not going to be linear. And some days you'll be able to do more things and more training and exercise than you were the day before. And being okay with that, and just knowing that that's the best way to go about recovery and returning to play.
Listening to your body and pulling back when you feel symptoms is crucial. So is prioritizing other aspects of your health and monitoring your activities outside of exercise.
One issue that people do not talk about often, but I think plays a significant role, is that if an athlete has a concussion, they should get plenty of rest and avoid alcohol. Some athletes, if you're on a computer, the lights from the computer makes their headaches worse. But then there's some athletes that can watch TV and it doesn't affect them. So I wouldn't restrict them from watching TV.
That I try to stay off of technology, and I made sure I prioritized sleep 100% because it was just, I still prioritize sleep 100% because that's our time for our bodies to recover and recuperate for just whatever you've done that day and prepare you for the next day. I tried to eat a healthy, well-balanced diet, get rid of processed foods. Yeah, I avoided like going out. I never really, I didn't drink alcohol before, but I definitely did not drink alcohol during the concussions. And I tried to stay away from caffeine, just stuff like that, just really looking after my well-being and treating my body as healthy as I could.
Caregivers of someone in the return to play process may feel helpless as their loved one struggles. But Dr. Jordan says they can offer support by simply helping them stay socially connected.
I think caregivers can be very supportive of an athlete who is recovering from a concussion. I think it's important that athletes are not socially isolated. I think they still need to be able to interact with their family members and friends. And I think it's really important to maintain your social context. And athletes that I have seen who take a long time to recover, often it's not the concussion at that point that's causing the problem. Sometimes it may be stress, anxiety, depression that's related to social factors that are occurring. So that's why it's important, I think, for the athletes to remain socially engaged and try to live a lifestyle as close to normal as possible so that they can recover from the concussion.
I had a few close relationships that stuck with me through it all, despite my emotional instability. And yeah, just relying on people and just taking it one day at a time and really not trying to look too far into the future because you can't change the outcome. You can only change the outcome of that day.
Julia finally started to make strides in her recovery once she began specialized treatments for her symptoms.
I did vision therapy, and that was probably the most helpful one because I was able to actually see the progression. And I also had whiplash, so my C1 vertebrae was off by 3 or 4 millimeters, and so I saw a chiropractor, and that was super helpful because I don't think if that had changed, I wouldn't have recovered in certain areas because that also causes a lot of similar symptoms and mirrors some of the symptoms of concussions. I went home for Christmas and they kind of told me to monitor my activity and journal my symptoms of what caused symptoms to flare up. And I kind of felt good throughout Christmas break. And I took the concussion protocol. I went through their exercises or series of return to play steps, which I can't really remember what those were, but I just remembered I was cleared and I was absolutely terrified to go back to the court because I just didn't associate it with something that I loved anymore. I just associated it with fear. So I never fully returned to practicing indoor. I remember I'd go and play a few drills, but anything that I felt unsafe in, which was probably 80% of the drills, I didn't do. I stayed on the back row and I'd pass and I'd hit from the back row, but anything on the front row, I didn't want to do it.
The emotional trauma Julie describes can be common for people who have suffered a debilitating concussion. When I returned to training for WWE after my first concussion, the prospect of taking another hit to the head was terrifying. Even if I felt well physically, psychologically, I knew I couldn't perform like I once could. But in Julia's case, she wasn't ready to leave volleyball completely.
So I knew that something needed to change. And I played beach volleyball with the club team, and just the way that you approach the beach game and how it's laid out, it's a lot different than indoor. And I felt a lot more safe because the ball is a bit bigger and softer. The ground is obviously softer. So if you face plant, it's not a hard word. And the game tactically is played differently. So instead of just trying to go up and hit every ball as hard as you can, which is mostly what indoor is, you're trying to place the ball where they're not. And there's a lot more finesse and off-speed shots to the game. So I thought that if I wanted to continue collegiate athletics, then I would have to pursue beach, and beach obviously wasn't offered at Carolina. So I reached out to a few beach schools and expressed my interest, and then I decided to transfer to the University of Hawaii to start beach there. And when I was there, I felt like I was still recovering the first year just because emotionally I was still not okay. And then year 2, I was thankfully, I was never physically or mentally better. And I just that's one of the biggest blessings. And when I have days where I'm frustrated with how I'm playing or whatnot, just reminding myself that I'm out here physically moving my body and feeling healthy is such a blessing. And taking that for granted, I never want to take it for granted again. I was definitely in a really dark place, and it was every day felt like a battle, and I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I really was just depressed and sad. And every day I didn't I knew that the next day was not going to be better, and that was such a scary place to be in. And talking about it now feels kind of weird because I'm on the other side of it, If you were to tell me how I feel now while I was going through it, I would not have believed you, because I genuinely do feel better mentally and physically than I have in my life. And there's not only evidence in what I'm saying, but it's how like I just said, how I feel. But I've never done better in school. I've doing well in my sport. I think because I prioritize recovery and just, like I said earlier, the well-being, that reaps benefits.
Julia's message is incredibly inspiring, and she is a shining example that recovery is possible, and you can find success and happiness again after battling concussion and post-concussion syndrome. As you know by now, each episode of Concussion Game Plan ends with messages of hope from our guests.
A single concussion, it will resolve, and that it just sometimes it may take time. For those athletes who require an extended period of time to recover, other issues should be looked into, such as anxiety, stress, and/or depression. And that most concussions will resolve in time.
I would say now to my past self going through that like, you're going to love life again. Like, you're going to be joyful again. You're going to have new passions. You're going to rebuild relationships. You're going to do all of these things. But it would be so hard for my past self to believe that, because of just the weight and difficulty of like that season and how that felt. I would say to anyone who's thinking about going back when they know that they're not 100%, don't do it. Don't do it, because there's people, obviously, like me, that have done it, and it is not worth it. The game is not worth it. The play is not worth it. Your team understands, and you need to prioritize your health and your brain. Though it may seem very important to play for this school or this team, it's minuscule in the scheme of things. And once you realize that the world doesn't revolve around winning a national championship, then you realize it's not that significant, and it makes the decision to put your health first a lot easier.
I could not agree more with Julia there. When I had to retire, it felt like so much of my life was taken from me. But I knew that continuing to force sports into my life would only make me feel worse. Once I felt better, I pursued other passions and learned to realize that sports were something I did, not who I was. I promise it is always worth it to put your health first. That will do it for this episode of Concussion Game Plan. Thank you to Julia Scholes for reliving those difficult days of her concussion recovery to spread such an important message. And to Dr. Barry Jordan for sharing his expertise to educate others on how to return to play safely after concussion. If you have any questions about what you heard today or want to get more involved with us at CLF, check us out at concussionfoundation.org. Coming up in our final episode of season 1, we'll take on a difficult recovery question. What if my symptoms just won't go away? CLF Medical Director Dr. Robert Cantu returns to break down post-concussion syndrome. You won't want to miss it. Until then, I'm Dr. Chris Nowinski. Keep fighting.